Well, hello. My name is Angel Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. If you are new to the show, welcome. I cover Massachusetts and New England crime stories. With history and advocacy, I cover solved and unsolved cases, cases of the missing and murdered, and events that changed us being Massachusetts and New England, the things that happen here. This show is currently ad-free, and I have a wonderful group of sustainers and supporters and patrons who help carry the expense of the show. You help get me to events and conferences, and more recently, into training to be a credentialed victims advocate. We are planning a 25th anniversary gathering of remembrance in honor of Deborah Mello, last seen on June 20th, 2000. So this year, on Friday, June 20th, 2025, we mark that 25th anniversary. We will gather from 6 to 8 p.m. at Memorial Field in Taunton, Massachusetts, which is Deborah's hometown, where we invite family and friends of Deborah, anybody who can make it, family members of other missing and murdered loved ones. Please come. Now, New England isn't known for serial killers per se, like maybe New York or Texas or Florida or California or Washington State. But they exist. I talked about it in the last episode with Bob Ward, crime reporter for Boston 25 News, and again for a feature that Bob did about the New England serial killer frenzy online. That led me to digging into our history. So let's talk about it. And there is a lot of it. This is episode 87, The History of New England Serial Killers. The strange case of Jolly Jane Toppin, Lowell, Massachusetts. Psychology today defines a serial killer as an individual who murders a series of victims over a period of time, typically with gaps in between each killing. Some serial killers kidnap and or torture their victims prior to murdering them. While it is not always clear what motivates serial killers to commit such heinous acts, abnormal psychological conditions, notably severe antisocial tendencies, are to blame. Now, in society, serial killers often generate fascination along with fear. Their crimes tend to bring notoriety, media attention, and fans who study their crimes or, in some cases, form relationships with the killers. We can name infamous serial killers from over the years. Some of the earliest multiple killers, there wasn't an understanding of such things, but the earliest multiple killers identified go back hundreds of years. This case is more than 100 years old. It is time-consuming to compare and confirm information. I pulled through pages and pages of documentation to get it right, to the best of my ability. The city of Lowell, Massachusetts had been home to one of the most prolific serial killers, a woman, a rarity in the serial killer sphere, who operated in the late 19th century. The world learned of a nurse named Jane Toppin. Her story would be one for the history books. Born Honora Kelley on March 31st, 1857. Now, a date that varies across the documentation. But Honora was born to Irish immigrant parents in Boston and would grow up on the corner of 3rd and Vernon Streets in the Centralville section of Lowell. When Honora was a toddler, her mother Bridget died of consumption, what they called tuberculosis. The children, Honora, her 8-year-old sister Delia, and possibly a third and maybe a fourth sister. According to the Lowell Historical Society, archives have shown that Honora had at least 2 older sisters, Ellen, who was called Nellie, and Delia. Someone named Mary Kelley appeared in the papers later, claiming to be a sister of Honora and Delia. No records were found. Unsubstantiated rumors had been printed about Honora's father, including that he was known as Kelley the Crack, as in crackpot. Peter Kelley was known to locals. He's been referred to as both an eccentric and a drunk. Now a widower and single father, he struggled to care for the girls by himself. An anti-Irish sentiment was rampant. In February of 1863, Mr. Kelley approached the Boston Female Asylum to surrender Honora and older sister Delia Josephine. It was noted that he was ill-equipped to handle his youngest daughters, and whose habits evidently rendered him an unfit protector for his little girls. Their appearance indicated that they had been rescued from a very miserable home. That information taken from their records from the Boston Female Asylum. It wasn't uncommon for the times. The Boston Female Asylum, or the BFA, was founded in 1803 as an orphanage for the care of indigent girls in Boston. Its mission was to receive, protect, and instruct female orphans until the age of 10 years, when they are placed in respectable families. Unfortunately, that's not what happened to a lot of these girls. Their stories are certainly much worse. Now, with their mother gone, his daughters as wards of the state, the last to be written about Mr. Kelley, he was found trying to sew his eyelids closed and was institutionalized. Foreshadowing of things to come, maybe? Life in the late 1800s was difficult. The 19th century saw a transition through the Industrial Revolution, a time of change marked by substantial advancements and changing social structures. Cities were crowded, rife with pollution. Families lived in tenements, big families in small places. This and poor sanitation led to disease and death. There was a very evident social class, and children had no capital. They were possessions, essentially. The rich lived in big, lovely homes, and the working poor struggled. Women's work was the household, care of the children. They were domestics, as in servants, women and children. And they did what they were told. Some women did grueling, unsafe factory jobs that came along with the rise of industrialization. And in New England, we were rich in textiles, with many mills to take advantage of workers. Urban planning revolutionized housing, with the layouts of cities getting a redesign to accommodate sanitation systems, public parks, and reliable transportation. Improved living conditions meant less disease, less suffering, hopefully. Innovations like the automobile, the telephone, and electric lighting aided society in incredible ways. And I have read that these sorts of innovations, improved railways and better roads, some would call them a blight on rural life, affecting traditional lifestyles. Wait till they get the radio, the devil's box. When Nora, as she was known, was around 7 years old, she left the girls' home. Taken in by Anne Toppin, a widow from Lowell whose husband Abner had died in 1841. She had 3 children of record. This information was listed in her obituary. Son Richard Stanford Toppin, Elizabeth Toppin Brigham, and another son Oliver, who was said to have died at 3 years old. It was around the same year that Honora was taken to be an indentured servant. I read a document about Honora that listed her adoption, I say that in quotes, in November of 1864. It also lists that the committee voted to allow her to go to the Toppins. That committee apparently were from the Boston Girls' Asylum. It is difficult to wrap my head around. She was from an Irish immigrant family. They were treated very poorly. She had no way to consent to any of this. It's hard to believe that a child like her was told that she was lucky to have a home, even if that meant she was a servant rather than just a child. The idea of indentured servitude was born of a need, or a want, for cheap labor. Servants worked for a period of time in exchange for a place to live. And I imagine some of these families who brought these children in to serve them thought in their own fucked up way that they were providing something to them. Like how special it was for them to be able to live and work in their home. It was not an easy life. But there were laws that protected some of their rights, supposedly. And indentured servants and adults had a contract, which could be extended for breaking the rules of the agreement. What Nora experienced was harmful and set her on a grisly path. One of the first changes made in her life, one of the many things that she had no control over, was her name. The mother, Anne Toppin, changed her name to Jane and passed her off as an Italian girl whose parents had died at sea. A name like Honora Kelley, well, it was too Irish. See, she came from an Irish immigrant family. They were not met with kindness. Nearly 2 million refugees had left Ireland for America during the beginning of 1845. The potato crops began to fail as a result of late blight. The potato blight fungus, this one is tough to say, Phytophthora infestans. Essentially water molds, a fungus-like microorganism that causes serious potato and tomato disease known as late blight or potato blight. Irish leaders in Dublin petitioned the Queen and the Parliament to act. They did at first, repealing the so-called corn laws and their tariff on grain, which made food such as corn and bread prohibitively expensive. But British lawmakers did not provide humanitarian aid, as to not interfere with the natural course of free markets to solve the crisis. By 1852, areas both south and west of Dublin saw huge declines in their population due to the lack of sufficient crops. With the growing cost of supplies, thousands starved to death, with hundreds of thousands more from disease caused by malnutrition. This Irish famine was the worst to occur in Europe in the 19th century. The arriving Irish to America faced fervent discrimination. In Boston, saw nearly 40,000 Irish arrive in the matter of a few years. Integrating that amount of newcomers was difficult. And they were Catholics. Religious conflict between Protestants and Catholics had already reared its ugly head long before. Today, the city is known as a stronghold of the Boston Irish Catholics. I can say for sure that I am one. The Irish were looked at as trash and embarrassment. Anti-Irish sentiment hung in windows, shops, newspaper ads. Signs read, "No Irish need apply." Similar signs would appear in the post-war years. "No Irish, no blacks, no dogs." Or similar appeared in the UK. Now, I won't fall deeper into this rabbit hole than I already have, but I've read counter-arguments, a sort of a takedown of this long-held belief, calling it a myth of victimization. Where have we heard that before? Honora, now Jane, was never legally adopted by the family, despite having given up her Irish name and identity. She grew up to be smart and mischievous. She did well in school and had many friends, but Jane did show signs of a sociopath, making up outlandish lies. That her father sailed around the world. She was related to an English nobleman by marriage. Her brother was given a medal at Gettysburg by Abraham Lincoln. Her father had given her up. She had no idea where her sisters were, and there was no way to know if she actually had a brother. She was at least verbally abused by her foster mother, Anne Toppin. But her daughter, Elizabeth, Jane's foster sister, treated her somewhat well. But Jane grew up resentful. Elizabeth was beautiful, admired, didn't have to work in the home. That's how Jane saw it. When Jane graduated from Lowell High School at 18, she received the $50 as part of her indentured agreement. That's the equivalent of about $1,700 today. She served the Toppins for 10 years at that point. During that time, she lost her name, her sister. She lost so much. And we don't really know what became of Delia Kelley. There is no record of her life before or after the asylum. Most research indicated little other than some presumptions that she went on to work as a prostitute in New York. Jane worked for the Toppins in Lowell until Anne Toppin passed, then for Elizabeth and her husband, who treated her better, but she was still their servant. Something happened to make her go, though. In her early 30s, Jane began training as a nurse at Cambridge Hospital. She earned the nickname Jolly Jane for her friendly personality. Patients seemed to like her, but she was a gossip. I take that as a bit untrustworthy. And as an adult, she continued to create elaborate tales. Many of her fellow students grew to loathe her. She built that reputation for being a pathological liar and was accused of many instances of theft over the years. Hospital administration grew concerned over her obsession with autopsies, but they did not know that she had experimented with morphine and atropine on her elderly patients. She'd watch the effects on their nervous system and falsify medical records to keep them in hospital longer. She secretly detested the elderly patients. She found them useless, dosing them with drugs to see how they'd react, then upping the dosage so they would suffer and she could watch them die. Sometimes bringing them to the edge of death only to nurse them back to a miraculous recovery. Patients died mysteriously in Jane's care. She would eventually be dismissed from Cambridge and landed a job at Mass General for about a year, but was also dismissed. She briefly returned to Cambridge, only to be canned again. This was a pattern that developed, but did not get flagged on her history. She forged documents to get work as an in-home nurse. Jane would have a long career as a private nurse and was hired by dozens of New England families, caring for sick and elderly patients. She was killing older family members or stealing their belongings without detection. Her poisoning spree ramped up in 1895 with the murder of Israel Dunham. That began a series of serial poisonings. Now, Jane had financial troubles. She was careless with money, and because of her carelessness in doling out those opiates, she lost her job at Cambridge Hospital and later at MGH. She had developed that reputation with her co-workers and concerned about Jane because of, quote, her unfounded and absurd, suspicious, tale-bearing, slanderous gossip and subsequent mischief-making, as well as her pleasure in inventing fabulous tales. That is a quote taken from a 1904 report from the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal, which now goes by the much more familiar name New England Journal of Medicine, which was rebranded in 1928. Now, Nurse Jane was often without work. Several instances of this unprofessional behavior shows up in Jane's background. How she misreported information, prolonged the illnesses of her favorite patients by reporting symptoms that didn't exist. And when I say favorite patients, I don't think that she held a lot of esteem for these people, but rather she targeted these people for some long, drawn-out, sick experimentation. In 1899, Jane murdered Elizabeth, her foster sister, with strychnine. Jane had always really resented Elizabeth, and she hatched another evil plan. Jane invited Elizabeth to come visit her while on vacation on Buzzards Bay, Cape Cod, where she would slowly and meticulously poison the only sister she really knew. One afternoon, they had a picnic on the beach. Corned beef, taffy, strychnine-laced Hunyadi water. It is a mineral water with sodium sulfate and magnesium sulfate. That gave it a laxative effect. It also came with a odd, bitter kind of taste, which could help mask the poison. Jane watched as the effects of the poison took over. She watched her foster sister die. It was Elizabeth who had the life she longed for, but could never attain. Her financial instability influenced who she chose as victims, as she often lived with or worked for those she poisoned. Jane had rented a cottage in Bourne from the Davis family, but she hadn't kept up with the rent. In June 1901, Maddie Davis took the train to Cambridge to collect the debt of $500, the equivalent today of about $15,000. Jane first agreed to pay, but instead, as they were supposedly leaving for the bank, she poisoned Maddie, and she collapsed. Maddie was supposed to meet her daughter, Genevieve Gordon, who was coming to the Cape from Chicago for the summer. Over the next 7 days, Jane would continue to poison Maddie Davis. Her unsuspecting daughter, Genevieve, rushed to be with her. Now, the doctor saw this thoughtful, attentive nurse stay by Maddie's side. And then, in early July, Jane gave the final and fatal dose. But Maddie's death was caused by complications from diabetes, so they believed at the time. That's another theme that we will discover among these murders. Jane then accompanied Genevieve to the Cape, attending Maddie's funeral, and was invited by Genevieve and her sister Minnie to stay with them for the summer. She moved in with Alden Davis, Maddie's widower, to take care of him and proceeded to poison his entire family one by one. Jane started by whispering among family members that Genevieve was having suicidal thoughts in the wake of her mother's death. Genevieve remained at the family's Calumet home that summer. And within just a few short weeks after her own mother's murder, Genevieve fell ill one night after dinner. She was dead by morning, and within weeks, the entire Davis family was dead. A doctor was called to the house. He attributed Genevieve's death to heart disease, despite her being in good health. Secretly, Jane was elated. No one had suspected her. Not yet. 2 weeks after the murders of the Davis family members, Jane returned to Lowell. She had Oramel Brigham in her sights, her sister Elizabeth's widower. She took out Edna Barrister, who was reportedly Oramel's 70-year-old sister. Jane felt she was an obstacle to her happiness. She began sort of courting him through poison, so she could prove herself by nursing him back to health. Oramel rejected all advances, which infuriated Jane. She threatened to claim he'd gotten her pregnant. In late September of that year, with Jane's plan to trap Oramel Brigham into marriage, she went through the motions of overdosing on morphine. It wasn't real. It was a manipulation. Let's face it, she was a serial poisoner. She knew how to kill somebody. She was hospitalized, and once she recovered, she went to visit a friend named Sarah Nichols, who lived with her brother in Amherst, New Hampshire. And oh boy, when I read that, I lived in Amherst, New Hampshire, once upon a time. Meanwhile, back on the Cape, Minnie Gibbs' father-in-law, Captain Paul Gibbs, was very suspicious. How is it that an entire family, a healthy family, could die so suddenly in rapid succession? A toxicologist was consulted, and Minnie's body was exhumed. The investigation revealed that she died of morphine and atropine poisoning, the result of foul play. Authorities learned that Jane was present during all of their deaths. After Jane was forced to leave the Brigham household, she went to New Hampshire really to seek refuge or to hide out. She was now under suspicion for multiple murders. She was surveilled by local authorities, and a Massachusetts state detective was following her everywhere she went. The day came when Jane's years of lying and manipulation and murder caught up to her at last. She was arrested on October 29th, 1901 at Sarah's house in Amherst. It's astounding to read this information about all of these people dying in such bizarre succession, with the one common denominator among all of them was Jolly Jane Toppin. This was a bizarre story even for 1901. For much of the time after being arrested, she did not seem too concerned about what the outcome might be. Jane served approximately 7 months in jail in preparation for her trial. News of her arrest and subsequent trial made global news. It was reported in headlines across the world. In March of 1902, doctors, including Hosea Quinby, George Jelly, and Henry Stedman, all evaluated Jane and determined her to be insane. Dr. Stedman, who I quoted earlier, shared his thoughts on Jane in his paper called A Case of Moral Insanity with Repeated Homicides and Incendiarism in Late Development of Delusions. That was published in 1904. Jane Toppin had one trial in the summer of 1902. She was charged with 12 counts of murder and confessed to her lawyer she killed at least 31 people, but maybe as many as 100. The list of people she is believed to be responsible for killing: in 1895, she killed her landlord, Israel Dunham. 2 years later, reportedly, she poisoned his wife, Lovey. She poisoned a patient named Mary McNear. There was another woman, Sarah Connors, to take her job as the dining hall matron at St. John's Theological School in Cambridge when she died on February 11th, 1900, at the age of 48. She was fired from that job due to financial irregularities in the office. Her death was attributed to complications of diseases. There was a man named William Ingram. He was a patient of Jane's in the hospital when she poisoned him. In 1899, she killed Elizabeth Brigham. Within 6 months, there was Florence Calkins. She, at the time of her death, was the housekeeper for Ormel Brigham, the widower of Elizabeth Toppin. Jane clearly needed Florence gone as a way to get back into the Brigham home. She died on February 15, 1900, at the age of 45. Jane, again, present in the household at the time of her death. Her death was initially ruled to have been caused by a stroke. She would poison her new landlords, Melvin and Eliza Beadle, in early 1901, but only enough to make them ill. Then she poisoned their housekeeper, Mary Sullivan. Her goal was to steal her job. Jolly Jane eliminated people one by one to get them out of her way. Mattie Davis, first victim of the Davis family, poisoned in 1901. Murder was her way out of that substantial debt that she owed. Genevieve Gordon, Mattie's daughter. Alden Davis, Mattie's husband, Genevieve's father, poisoned after losing his wife and daughter. Minnie Gibbs, another daughter of Mattie, poisoned shortly after her father. On June 23, 1902, in an 8-hour trial, Jane Toppin was declared not guilty by reason of insanity and sentenced to the Taunton State Hospital for life. The jury deliberated for all of 27 minutes. Jane did confess to her attorney, James Stewart Murphy of Lowell, to the killing of 31 people, but later added it could be as many as 100. It's impossible to know if this is true, but there are stories that Jane met a man when she was 16, and he agreed to marry her and gave her a ring in the shape of a bird. He relocated to find work and soon fell in love with the daughter of his landlady and sent word back to Jane that the engagement was off. What happened to the promise ring, we'll never know. Rumors are that she destroyed it. But I ask this question: did this rejection trigger something in Jane? Of all this, she said, if I had been a married woman, I probably would not have killed all of those people. I would have had my husband, my children, and my home to take up my mind. There's one very sick addendum to the story. It was revealed that as Jane Toppin was watching people die from the poison she administered to them, she found pleasure in that. She was excited by what was happening. The murder of all of these people she is believed to be responsible for, all of their causes of death, their official causes of death, were never poison. They never appeared suspicious at all until the Davis family. Israel Dunham was 83. His cause of death was strangulated hernia. Lovey Dunham, his wife, who she killed 2 years later, was reportedly dead at 87 of old age. Jane Toppin was her nurse. Her sister, Elizabeth Toppin Brigham, died on August 19th, 1899, of heart failure. Jane present when she died. Mary McNear, wealthy widow, died December 28th, 1900. 2 days illness. Jane Toppin was her nurse. Florence Calkins, the housekeeper, died at age 45 of heart failure. Sarah Connors, the matron at St. John's Theological School, 48 years old when she died on February 11th, 1900, of complications of disease, also under the care of Jane Toppin. Maddie Davis, she died on July 4th, 1901 at the age of 62. Cause given, chronic diabetes. Jane was her nurse. Genevieve Gordon, daughter of Maddie Davis, died on July 31st, 1901 of a short illness. No death certificate was available to list her official cause. Jane was her nurse. Alden Davis, husband of Maddie, father of Genevieve, died on August 8th, 1901 at age 65. His death ruled a cerebral hemorrhage initially, but Jane was his nurse. Mary Gibbs, known as Minnie, died on August 13th, 1901. She was just 40 years old. Edna Bannister, sister of brother-in-law Mr. Brigham, died August 27th, 1901, age 77. 2 days illness listed as heart failure. Jane was in the house when she died. She was a clear threat to Jane. The story is outrageous. So much has changed from 1902. The motive, we'll never know, but she was mentally unstable and sadistic. She took great delight in the power that she possessed over these people. Newspapers of the time reported that she admitted that she was not insane. She was 44 when she was involuntarily committed to the Taunton State Hospital. Israel and Lovey Dunham, Elizabeth Brigham, Mary McNair, Florence Calkins, William Ingram, Sarah Connors, Edna Bannister, Maddie Davis, Genevieve Gordon, Alden Davis, Minnie Gibbs. Some of these murders, the Davis family for one, appeared to be solely to get her out of debt. She owed them an enormous amount of money, so she murdered 4 people. She admitted she derived sexual excitement from patients being near death, coming back to life, and then dying. She would hold them and touch them as the life drained from their bodies. After Jane's arrest, one former patient, a woman named Amelia Finney, spoke of an experience after an operation in 1887. She recalled later that Jane had given her a dose of bitter medicine and she lost consciousness. Jane Toppin climbed into bed with Amelia Finney. Something startled Jane and she stopped whatever it was that she was doing to Amelia. Amelia Finney thought this was all just a fever dream. But upon learning of Jane Toppin's arrest, she realized that it was not. Amelia Finney was certainly not the only patient Jane had done this to. She did say she's responsible for upwards of 100 murders. Jane Toppin lived out her days at the Taunton Insane Asylum, where she died on August 17, 1938, at 81 years old. Many believe that she never truly was insane, including brother-in-law Ormel Brigham, who she didn't kill, surprisingly. But her time in Taunton definitely impacted her. Jane Toppin developed a phobia of sorts, ironic really, that her food was poisoned, oftentimes refusing to eat it. Past attendants at the Taunton Asylum recalled her calling them into her room, where she would say to them, "Get some morphine, dearie, and we'll go out into the ward, and you and I will have a lot of fun seeing them die." Jane Toppin is buried at the Mayflower Hill Cemetery in Taunton, grave 984, section 34 in Potter's Field. Jolly Jane Toppin goes down in history as one of the most sadistic serial killers in all of New England, and quite possibly all of the United States. It's unusual for a woman to create this kind of horror and carnage. I wonder what life would have had in store for Honora Kelley had she been allowed to keep her name and her Irish identity. Had she had some kind of relationship with her biological sisters, it is possible it would have ended similarly. It does pose the nature versus nurture question. What we do know is that we will simply never know. Coming up in future episodes, we will talk about the Boston Strangler, H.H. Holmes, the New Bedford highway murders. I have been researching the very storied history of serial killers in the New England states. They are very interesting stories and such a part of New England crime history. Yes, these stories have been told and retold and sensationalized in books, in movies, in television series. That is true. We could stand to learn a few things about these stories and the humanity that lives within them. Thank you for listening. My name is Angelle Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind. Massachusetts and New England crime stories, history, we got a lot of that today, and advocacy. Follow the show at Crime of the Truest Kind, online crimeofthetruestkind.com. There you can find information about the show notes, source links, and more. Subscribe to the email list. I send out a monthly newsletter. There are many ways you can support the show. Leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Share the show. Tell your friends. Post about it in your various online internet groups. You can drop a tip in the jar. And you will, in fact, be buying All the Dogs a Bone. There are many of them, and they like bones. Become a patron on Patreon. 4 tiers starting at just $1. Many of whom I need to thank. Superstar EP Lisa McColgan, Total Gem Danielle, Solid Gold, C Moxie, Holly, Kate, Michelle with 1 L, Pam K, V Brandt, thank you for everything. In closing, Friday, June 20th, Memorial Field in Taunton, Massachusetts, we will gather in memory of Deborah Mello. It is the 25th anniversary of her disappearance. Deborah has not been seen by her family since that day. More thanks to Steve, another Michelle, and Stacy. Stacy has helped the show so much over the last couple of months. I've been working through some technical issues that started last week. I think I'm over the hump. All right, I'm going to go. Be good, everybody. Keep safe. And lock your goddamn doors.